I never thought a simple job could change your life so completely. I was a few weeks out of college with no clear direction when I got an offer to work at the Pines Motel, a small, rundown place on the edge of nowhere. I needed money, and the pay was decent, so I accepted without much thought. That decision would lead me into a world I can hardly explain even now. On my first day, I pulled up to the motel at dusk. The building wasn't much to look at. An old two-story structure with a faded sign and a parking lot that stretched into the dark. I remember feeling a slight shiver, but I brushed it off as nerves mixed with the cool night air. The manager, a quiet man named Mr. Harlan, greeted me with a nod. His smile was small, almost too tight, and his eyes seemed to hide secrets he didn't want to share. He handed me a set of keys and said in a low tone, "Watch your steps. This place has its own way of doing things." I thanked him, still unaware of what those words would mean. That very night, I began my shift. My job was simple: check the rooms, make sure everything was in order, and answer any odd calls that might come through on the phone at the front desk. The corridors were dimly lit by a few flickering bulbs, and every step I took echoed in the silence. I started my rounds with no hint of danger until I reached room 8. Room 8 was odd from the start. The door was slightly open, and inside I could hear a soft humming. I knocked, but there was no answer. Only the sound of the humming that grew louder as I pushed the door open. The room was empty, with just an old radio on a small table playing a half-tuned station. I turned it off and left the room, feeling uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, even though the room was clearly empty. Over the next few nights, strange things began to happen. I'd get phone calls on the quiet line with nothing but silence on the other end, just a faint static that sometimes morphed into whispered words I couldn't quite understand. Other times, I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye in the dark hallways. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the incidents kept growing more unsettling. One night, as I walked back from my rounds, I noticed that one of the corridors seemed to stretch on longer than it ever had before. The lights flickered, and I felt as if the air itself was watching me. I took a deep breath and continued, trying to dismiss the growing dread. But then I heard a soft knock coming from one of the closed doors. The sound was gentle but persistent, almost as if someone was tapping out a secret code. I approached room 12 with caution and pushed the door open. Inside, nothing was out of place, until I saw a small handwritten note on the bed that read, "Don't trust the night." My heart pounded as I scanned the room for any sign of who might have left it, but it was completely empty. I left the note on the bed and quickly exited, wondering if someone was playing a cruel trick. The next day, curiosity got the best of me. I asked Mr. Harlan about the note, but he only shook his head and said, "This place carries old voices." His vague answer did little to calm my growing fear. That night, while I was checking the security cameras in the small office behind the front desk, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. On one of the screens in a hallway I hadn't even been in yet, a shadow moved quickly across the frame. Too fast to be a person, yet with a presence that felt all too human. I rewound the footage several times, trying to catch another glimpse of the figure, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. My unease grew with each passing shift, but I knew very well that I had bills to pay and I wouldn't be able to get such a well-paying job anytime soon. So I decided to bear these things until I found another reasonable job. I started to record my experiences in a little journal, jotting down every odd event, every unexplained noise, every strange call. The motel, I learned from a crumpled newspaper article I found in a dusty drawer, had a long and troubled past. Over 50 years ago, several guests had disappeared without a trace, and locals whispered that the motel was cursed, its walls haunted by those who had never left. I wasn't sure if I believed in curses, but the more I experienced, the more I began to wonder if there was some truth in those old tales. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a chilly, moonless night, and the storm outside had just begun to pick up. I was making my rounds when I heard a sudden loud thump from somewhere deep in the building. My heart hammered as I followed the noise to what I thought was an empty storage room. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside with my flashlight trembling in my hand. In the dark, I could barely see a set of old filing cabinets and dusty boxes. But then, one cabinet slowly swung open on its own, scaring the living hell out of me. It revealed a hidden stack of old photos and letters. I picked one up, and my blood ran cold. It was a faded picture of a smiling family dated over 50 years ago with a note on the back that said, "Never leave." I felt a chill that wasn't just from the storm. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on and off in rapid succession, and I saw a flash of movement. A figure standing behind me in the mirror of a dusty filing cabinet. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Panic set in as I dashed back out into the corridor. The familiar hall seemed to twist and change as I ran, like the building itself was trying to trap me. I eventually burst through a side door that I hoped led to the outside, only to find myself in a narrow hallway I didn't remember before. In that hallway, the atmosphere was different. The air was thick and heavy, and every step echoed like a drumbeat. I followed the corridor until I came to a small door marked "Employees Only." With no other option, I pushed it open and found myself in a cramped break room. I sank into a dusty chair trying to catch my breath when suddenly the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. My heart raced as I fumbled with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, a soft, almost melodic hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It grew louder and louder until it filled the room with an overwhelming presence. In the middle of that terror, I saw a faint light from the far corner, where a small, old radio began to play by itself. The tune was simple, like a lullaby, yet every note carried a weight of sorrow and warning. I spent what felt like hours in that room, huddled and trembling, until the door finally swung open on its own. I didn't wait to see if someone was there. I bolted out into the stormy night, my mind reeling from the events of the past hours. I went home convinced that I would not set foot in this motel again. I slept after deciding I would call Mr. Harlan in the morning to quit. But as the next morning dawned, I woke up. I spent the first half an hour in bed trying to process what had happened last night. One thought led me to another, and my curiosity got the best of me. If the motel was cursed, who cursed it and why? If it is cursed, how am I in one piece? Is it possible that it was not a curse in action but a lost soul who was wronged trying to tell me something? But if it is a curse, can I somehow bring it to an end? This was somewhat my thought process that morning. I remember there was almost a strange compulsion in making me satisfy this curiosity. I had some inner conflicts later, questioning my judgment, but I ended it at the thought that I came out all of this in one piece. That might be a sign of my obligation to get a better picture of all this, which might result in an overdue justice being served. My assurance of safety to myself was that if, whatever it was, wanted to harm me, it would have done so already. I just needed the courage to withstand such an incident like last night without letting it get the best of me, if anything such happened again, until I get to the end of all this. Looking back, I should not have watched as many horror movies and shows as I did. It might have prevented me going back. In the following days, things became even stranger. I began to notice that the same unsettling events happened every night, like a loop I couldn't break. A soft knock at my door, whispered voices when I was alone, and that same chilling message, "Don't trust the night," appeared again in different forms, scrawled on a mirror, whispered in the wind, even appearing on the edge of my dreams. I tried to warn Mr. Harlan, but he only looked at me with pity and said, "The motel takes its toll on all of us sooner or later." One night I decided to follow the trail of these mysteries. I stayed late after my shift, wandering the corridors with only my journal and flashlight. I came across a door I'd never seen before, a door with no number and a heavy lock that looked out of place. Something in my gut told me this was the key to all the strange happenings. I managed to pick the lock with a set of hairpins I had hidden away for emergencies. Inside, I found a small, dark room filled with stacks of old letters, diaries, and photographs. It was like stumbling into a secret history of the motel. As I sifted through the papers, I read about a woman named Alice who had once worked at the motel. She wrote about a terrible night when everything changed, about a power outage, whispers in the halls, and guests who seemed to vanish right before her eyes. In her final entry, she described being followed by a shadow that wanted something from her, something she couldn't give. The last line was scrawled in trembling handwriting. "I fear I am already part of this place." I shuddered at the thought. Could it be that I was falling into the same trap that had claimed so many before me? That same night, while I sat in the hidden room, a noise startled me, a soft shuffle coming from behind a stack of boxes. I spun around, and there, in the dim light, stood a figure that looked almost human. It was a woman, with sorrowful eyes and a sad smile, her presence both comforting and terrifying. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me she was pleading for help. I couldn't tell if she was a ghost or just a memory of the motel's past, but in that moment, I felt a deep, aching connection to her. I followed her silently as she moved through the narrow corridors, her presence guiding me deeper into the mystery of the motel. The further we went, the stranger the building became. The walls seemed to whisper secrets, and the floorboards creaked in patterns that I couldn't ignore when, after all of a sudden, the woman disappeared. I immediately went to the reception and stayed all night there. I didn't want to think about it too much, though I began to wonder if the woman was Alice. And then came the final twist that I will never forget. One rainy night, as I was closing up after my shift, I received a call on the old phone at the front desk. The line was crackling with static, but I could make out a voice, soft and desperate. It whispered, "Help me, please." I asked who it was. She replied, "Alice." I froze. I listened as the voice repeated the plea, and just before the line went dead, she said, "In basement." Driven by a mix of fear and determination, I grabbed my keys and headed toward the back of the motel, where I remembered there was an old maintenance area. The corridors were dark and filled with the echoes of my own footsteps as I searched for the source of the call. I finally found a door marked basement. With a racing heart, I pushed it open and descended a creaky staircase into a place that smelled of damp earth and decay. In the basement, I found a narrow corridor lined with old lockers and machinery that had long been forgotten. The air was heavy, and I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows. At the very end of the corridor, I saw a door slightly ajar, and through the gap, I caught a glimpse of a faint light. I nudged the door open and found myself in a small room that looked like an old storage space, filled with boxes, old tools, and scattered photographs. On one of the boxes, I saw a name, Alice. My heart pounded as I realized this was her space, a secret corner of the motel where she had left behind traces of her life. In the center of the room lay a single old diary bound in worn leather. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. The pages detailed her final days at the motel, her growing terror, the strange occurrences that led her to believe that the motel was more than just a building, and her desperate attempts to escape. But then, as I read the last entry, the lights in the room began to flicker, and I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned around slowly, and for a brief moment, I saw her standing there, a pale figure with eyes full of sorrow and a gentle smile that seemed to say, "I'm sorry." In that moment, I understood. Alice was trapped here, just as many others had been, and now, in a twist I could never have imagined, she was reaching out to me. The lights went out completely, and the room plunged into darkness. I scrambled for my flashlight, but when I turned it on, the diary was gone, and so was any sign of Alice. Instead, I heard soft laughter echo through the basement, mingled with the distant sound of a lullaby. I ran out of that room, up the stairs, but the stairs weren't coming to an end. I was stuck in a never-ending loop. As I was climbing the stairs, hoping I will reach to the top soon, I heard a terrifying voice which shouted at me, "Stop!" I was terrified. I didn't think twice and stopped. I didn't want to turn around in fear I might see the thing that shouted at me, but then I heard voices of people laughing. And the next thing I know, I was waking up on the floor at the reception. It was almost 6 a.m. I left that morning, my decision made without hesitation. I quit the job and drove away, the building's dark silhouette receding in my rearview mirror. Even now, I still get chills when I think about that place. The motel isn't just a building, it's a trap, a place where the past and the present collide, where lost souls wander and secrets never die. I keep my journal as a reminder of what I experienced and as a warning. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. That night still haunts my dreams, the quiet voice of Alice echoing in the darkness, and the feeling that the motel is always waiting, always hungry for the next soul to wander in. Though I wonder, why did the motel let me go, and that whether Mr. Harlan was somehow involved in it. But if I have learned anything from all this, is that some mysteries are best left unsolved, and some places are best left unvisited. I was desperate. No job, no savings, and barely enough gas to keep my car moving. For weeks, I'd been hopping from town to town looking for work, but every now hiring sign turned into a dead end. My last few bucks went toward gas and a cheap sandwich, and now I was running on fumes, both my car and myself. I was exhausted, hungry, and running out of hope. The sun had set hours ago, and the highway was nothing but a long, empty stretch of darkness. No towns, no exits, no signs of life, just endless road and my growing anxiety. I had maybe a few more miles left in my tank before I'd be stranded in the middle of nowhere. Then out of the darkness I saw it. A neon sign flickered in the distance. Vacancy. Below it in smaller, faded letters, help wanted. I slowed down as I approached. The motel sat just off the road, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. It wasn't on my GPS and I hadn't seen any billboards for it. But right now, I didn't care how strange it was. I needed a place to sleep, and if they were hiring, I needed that job. I pulled into the gravel lot and parked in front of the small office. The building looked old, weathered wood, a single dim light above the entrance, and a few scattered cars in the lot, though I saw no people. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a dull red glow over the cracked pavement. Inside, the lobby was even quieter. A small desk sat at the far end, next to a wall of keys hanging on rusted hooks. The place smelled of old wood and something stale, like air that hadn't moved in years. A man sat behind the desk, watching me as I stepped inside. He looked normal enough, middle-aged, thin, with sharp features and deep-set eyes, but something about him made me uneasy. His smile was a little too wide, his posture too stiff. "You looking for a room?" "Actually, I saw the sign. Help wanted." "We could use the help." His smile widened just slightly. He didn't ask for a resume, didn't ask for references, just reached under the desk and pulled out a key. "Room 8, you can start tonight." "What kind of job is it?" "You'll be the night manager. Just keep an eye on things. Make sure guests follow the rules. Easy work." It sounded too good to be true, but I didn't have the luxury of turning down easy work. I took the key. "Man, get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." I nodded and walked out, heading toward my room. The motel was eerily quiet. A row of single-story units stretched into the darkness, each with a single yellowed light above the door. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something else, something metallic, like rust or blood. I reached room 8 and pushed the door open. The room was small, just a bed, a nightstand, and a wooden chair. It smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old linens. The wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet was stained, but I didn't care. I locked the door behind me, sat on the bed, and exhaled. That's when I noticed the closet. The door was slightly ajar, a crack of darkness beyond it. I stared at it for a long moment, my exhaustion making my thoughts foggy. The closet was empty, I was sure of it. But something about the way the door was open just a sliver made my skin crawl, like someone had been inside, like someone was still inside. I stood up and walked over, gripping the edge of the door. My heart pounded as I yanked it open. Nothing. I shook my head at myself and shut the door firmly, just tired. I lay down and closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep. But something felt off. The air was too still, the room too silent. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A faint creak. My eyes snapped open. It came from the closet. I turned my head slowly. The door was open again, just a crack. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard it open, hadn't felt anyone enter the room, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. A presence, watching me from the sliver of darkness inside that closet. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the opening. For a split second, I saw something. A shape. A figure crouched deep in the shadows, long fingers curled around the edge of the door. A pair of eyes, wide, dark, and empty, locked onto mine. The light flickered. The figure lunged. I scrambled off the bed, crashing into the nightstand. The lamp shattered. The door, my only exit, was across the room, but my legs wouldn't move fast enough. I turned back toward the closet just as the door slammed shut on its own. Silence. I stood there, frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air in the room had changed, heavier, colder. I wanted to run, but something in me knew that if I turned my back, the door would open again. That if I moved too fast, whatever was inside would come out. Slowly, I backed toward the door, never looking away from the closet. My fingers fumbled for the lock. I twisted it, yanked the door open, and stumbled outside. The parking lot was empty. The neon sign still flickered. The night was silent, as if nothing had happened. I turned back to my room. The door was still open, but the closet door was shut. I grabbed my car keys from my pocket, not caring that I had nowhere to go. I jumped into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and peeled out of the lot, gravel kicking up behind me. My heart pounded as I sped down the empty highway, leaving the motel behind. I don't know how long I drove, hours maybe. I didn't stop until I saw a gas station where I finally pulled over, shaking and breathless. I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just a second, I swore I saw a flicker of red neon, vacancy, and below it, help wanted,